I'm Al Deldegan, the creator and producer of the LIBI podcast. This 100% volunteer-run show was born out of the Rainforest Alberta movement and features incredible people who are leaders, innovators, and have big ideas. The host for this episode is Rea Hailley, and her guest is Willow Adkins. Rea, the mic is yours.
Hi, Willow. Welcome. Excited to have you on the show.
Thanks. I'm really excited to be here as a guest talking to you about something that I really love.
Yes. Yeah, I'm really excited to dive into this. Now, Willow, for our listeners, can you please tell us who you are, tell us about your company, and maybe where you're located?
Sure. So I'm Willow Adkins, and I recently relocated back to New York City, where I had lived 20 years ago before I had my two daughters. I am an entrepreneur now the last 15 months, and I'm running my own strategic advisory firm called Blair and Company, which really focuses on enabling companies and founders of those companies and CEOs and senior leaders of those companies to really enable their sales team to spearhead and focus on revenue growth.
And I think every company could benefit from that service.
That's what I'm learning. I had worked for almost my entire career for a single company, but in many different divisions working with different teams. And now as I'm being introduced more and more outside of my client network, but really to Blair's clients, I'm finding the exact same thing. No matter the industry, the size of company, most people are craving this because there's a lot of noise in the amount of information and data that we consume on a daily basis. So the clarity of what is really sales, how do I get better at it, and how do I really allow myself or my sales team, depending on your role, to focus on that skill that they have and not get bogged down in data, in administration, and in things that don't produce revenue.
Yes. And we're going to touch on all those things. Now, for our listeners, who would this episode benefit? Can a small business benefit from the insights you're about to share, or is it more catered towards larger businesses?
Great question. So initially, I had always thought that I came from a very large company. So certainly my experience is there. One of my passions and interests, though, in that company were clients that were small businesses. How did they start out? How did they build? And so that sort of was a natural interest for me. But truly, every size company, no matter if it's a couple of people and they don't even have a formal sales team, or if it's one with many layers and has a sales team, I think would benefit. And I'm also uncovering that because I truly believe that anyone participating in any economy, anywhere in the world, really is truly connected to sales, that we have clients now that are creatives that are looking for fundraising, or we have nonprofits that are looking for the ideal fundraising or donor target, and it really applies to them as well. So we're applying some of the data methods that we found useful within commercial and corporate and utilizing that same process and same thinking to those individuals, and it's really empowering and exciting for them to be able to cut through the noise and get to individuals who, again, have a alignment with their vision as a either nonprofit or creator, their target audience. It's really quite similar to a small or even large multinational corporation in terms of acquiring a client or a donor.
Yeah. And I know that you build repeatable frameworks. Could you tell us what that framework could look like?
Yeah. So as I was reflecting on how I formed the business, one of the things that kept coming up for me was that through my career, either as a salesperson or managing people, a lot of the same things that I employed or then worked with and refined and taught my teams were very similar, sort of similar principles. And I continued to try to distill them down to what were they? Like, what were they really if you wrote them out on a piece of paper? And those really became the frameworks of Blair. which was, how do you interact with people, your customers and your team? How do you deliver what you're delivering, whether it's a service or a product, and generate the revenue around that service or product? And then what are those processes that connect the two together so that everything can work efficiently? And the reason I chose frameworks and these specific pillars and words was to lay it out visually and then be able to explain to people that at the foundation of commercial and of sales, lots of things are quite similar, even if your go-to-market and your client base or your donor base is completely different.
Yeah. And you've seen it all, Willow, because I'm looking at your history here, and you've really built pipelines from nothing and then led teams through that messy middle growth phase and beyond. So I can see how your wisdom is very well-rounded, that you've been in all those difficult situations and have successfully grown sales. And what was that process like for you going through that?
I don't like to think about this time period, but we all globally experienced it rather forcibly, so to speak. Was during the global pandemic, I was forced to reconsider, what did my sales team, who traveled 50 to 80% of the time, what would they do now that they were not doing that? And I think it crystallized a lot of what I already believed, but it really forced me to think about, wow, we will come out of this completely different, and what will we do differently? And I started studying and researching more about this idea of continuous improvement. We're going to have to change the way we do things, but maybe this is an opportunity to do things differently. And how will we come out of this? And then, so when we did emerge from this and we were interacting with customers again, it was a very different way. And there were certain things that I would challenge my team and myself to think about. We did a lot of video calls. We were able to gather a lot of information. It became more efficient to do that rather than, say, taking a plane or a car and doing a discrete meeting. And how could you take the good of what we learned and refine it, make it better, and continually to look? It really challenged us to look at really doing everything quite differently. And that started, I think, an earnest journey of that for me. At that time, there were different apps coming out to help people be more efficient. There were, and now certainly in the last few years with AI, that has also lent us new tools. But again, examining what are the best ones that work. And again, keeping in mind this idea of still simplifying and still really being rooted in the foundation of commercial engines or sales being in this framework that we deliver, right? People, processes, and profit or revenue.
Yeah. And if you're talking to a business owner right now who might be struggling with sales, especially with the current state of our economy, what advice would you give them?
Yeah, so one of the things that I think when you present the idea or the concept to people, it seems quite obvious. And I think, it was to me when I discovered this, but it's really the easiest thing that a lot of business owners or leaders can do, which is talk to the people that work for them what's your experience with this? What are your ideas? Not with the promise that you will implement them, not with the promise that you're changing the business based on what they say, but really to be in that listening mode. And also customers. What I had observed is sometimes leaders or owners do one or the other or neither. So if you're only listening to your customers, it's great. It's very customer centric. But then listening to the people that are working with those customers can be equally valuable. And often I would discover answers to challenges with revenue or challenges with, I know this happened for us when I led a team who went from I had a team prior to that who had very few contacts within each company. I then managed a team who had almost an unlimited amount of contacts they could call in as potential clients. And I could have solved that problem probably eventually or maybe never by guessing myself or implementing something I knew from the past. But what I did was ask them and talk to the sales reps that were contending with this and what were their challenges, because they were quite different than my prior teams. And so I think the answer sometimes is really right there in front of us. It's just talking to the people that work with us.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think this is something that a lot of corporations can miss out on. I remember years ago when I was working in sales, I was doing very well and I was building solid relationships with my client base.
Okay.
But when they would share their challenges with me and I would take it to leadership, would just ignore it and just say, yeah, that's just the way things are. And I could never wrap my mind around that. Like, how is it that you are ignoring this incredibly valuable piece of advice from our paying clients who are telling us how to make their lives easier, which will eventually result in additional revenue? But yeah, it just fell on deaf ears. And I thought, wow. And eventually I just stopped sharing information because I knew nothing was being done about it. And of course, I had a lot of empathy for the clients I was working with. But yeah, it astounds me how simple this is and how often it is overlooked.
I'm smiling and nodding and agreeing because this is something I heard a lot. And I think that idea of this is the way things are is such a common response because it requires change and there's comfort there. And of course, it's been established because people either do or had believed this was the right way to do things. And so when I say the pandemic was disruptive, I think it's easier to go back to the way things were and then it was harder to do the other thing. And then when you're a manager, because let's say I'm working with a larger company, right? And there's a manager feeling the same way you are, how do you implement that? How do you change? And can you change that within a company? And I think the answer is maybe, but it goes then back to the data. So as an individual sales rep, it's hard you're not going to take the time to go out and say, poll all of your customers, et cetera. I think one of the things that people can do that, again, may not always be met with success, but is having those leaders and inviting those leaders to just simply talk to the same customer or putting them in situations where they can do that in not a forced way so they hear it directly from the customers. And then if there's a danger, certainly, to reacting to every potential idea or potential, you bring a team in and you actually have them list out the top 3 challenges that they're experiencing. You can anonymize it or not for the greater team, put all of those together. And then often what ends up happening, and this is what was surprising and actually wonderfully surprising for me, is that exercise often uncovers the sort of even more hidden that the loudest person hasn't been shouting about, that maybe, to your point, a lot of other people thought it isn't even changeable because this is the way it's always been. But once people have written that sort of out in paper and documented it, and then they vote on it, so to speak, as the biggest challenge, that's really eye-opening. Yeah. It was eye-opening for me as a manager, and I think it was eye-opening for the team because it really elevated things that people believed couldn't be changed because they had already accepted them as that's the way it always is.
Yeah. Yeah. And you could definitely get stuck in that rut. Now, I know that you think that admin work is #1 sales killer. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, I harken back to my days when I first started in sales. There was no internet, it was dial-up internet. And there were fax machines that you were receiving your signed agreements on. So the pace of information acquisition and communication was very different. That obviously is not the case today. But I don't think that as a society in general, we have prepared ourselves for that. We've just continued onward without thinking, almost like this is just the way things are. And about 10 years ago, when I was beginning to manage a new team that had been always required to do a lot of travel, I noticed that they really weren't able to do all the travel. And I wondered, why is this? So I did an informal poll. How much time do you spend sending emails? How much time do you spend responding to emails, dealing with internal things, booking your travel, and then, of course, seeing your clients? And I expected to get some low numbers on seeing clients, but they were far lower than I expected. And the amount of time they had actually spent doing internal, like I would say almost like air traffic control and navigation was far more than I expected. And I lumped that all into really admin and efficiency of processes. And that's really when I started exploring this idea. But now it's become even more urgent, I think, in a way, because life is so much more fast paced, but the expectation of communicating and keeping everyone around you and your company up to date is still quite high. And I got a lot of reaction when I started talking about it online, but then I started thinking, how can I solve for this? What is this? Is there even a solution? And if so, what is the solution? And so I've been playing around with this concept of no admin sales. Would it ever be possible for a salesperson to have low or no administration so they could really curate the relationships, form the relationships, close the deals, et cetera, that they're good at and that they were hired for? And I don't have all the answers yet, but I think it's twofold. One is reducing some of the expectation of this is the way we've done things and just simply saying, is this necessary? Do we need this bit of information? And then the other thing is either having someone like my company or a system, right, that they can establish or use from another company, help them do all of that admin upfront work that they still agree is necessary to propel the business, but almost have it in a way so that you as a salesperson are only getting engagements that are ideal customers or even ideal donors to my nod earlier to nonprofits, et cetera, that are sales qualified, like truly sales qualified. And imagine if that were the case. And I think it's possible. And we're putting together those processes and continually refining them every day. And we have some testers that are helping us really challenge ourselves to do that because I think it is possible.
I think it is too. And even if you're saving, let's say 6 or 7 hours a week in admin time, imagine what that would do to your business to have that time dedicated to sales instead of admin work. And again, going back to my early career, I hated admin work. Absolutely hated it. I wanted to be selling, but I couldn't sell without doing the admin work. And again, this is many decades ago, but when I was asking for support, I was told, no, it's not in the budget. And do you even know how much more money I can make you?
Right.
If I just had that admin support? And nowadays, with AI and with custom software being so affordable, it's so much easier to build tools and systems for people that are very intuitive and that don't require that mental tax that comes with working with Salesforce, for example, or HubSpot, because they are clunky and they do require a lot of time and they're very frustrating to use. So of course that's going to impact the quality of the data that's going into the platform. So bypass all that.
Exactly. As I reflected back on this idea of no or low admin sales, I thought and this is what again propelled me, was that some of my most productive, quote, best salespeople were ones that I frequently had to hear from management that were not good at the admin work. And so this, I think, also led me down this path of the why, because they were prioritizing really what they were being paid to do, which was generate revenue over things that they had realized were not revenue generating, which was entering notes, community updating, because those things don't happen, or didn't, at least at that time, happen without manual human intervention.
Yeah.
And you're right. Yeah. It is possible now. And I think that's where there's really an opportunity to challenge ourselves to why do we continue to conduct certain parts of business in a very old-fashioned manual way when there are, frankly, it's proven there are better ways to do it that will increase revenue.
Definitely. And drawing on my experience, I'm a co-founder of New Idea Machine, which means I'm out there doing most of the selling. And so when it came time for us to select our CRM, I refused any off-the-shelf solutions because they don't work the way that my mind works. And I made it very clear to my co-founder that I need something that's very intuitive and that literally works like my mind works. So matches my workflow so that I can go in there and put the information in as quickly and easily as possible. And more importantly, I can get a snapshot of the entire business from one screen at any point in time. So I don't have to dig through multiple layers and multiple reports to get the data I'm looking for. And that's exactly what we built. And it's so smooth, so effortless, so flawless. And I think, wow, why isn't everybody doing this? I've used tools like Salesforce and HubSpot, and I hated every minute of it. And that definitely drains you. And of course, like I mentioned earlier, you just do not want to deal with that platform. So you're less likely to actually update the data that you need to update.
Because it becomes, again, I saw this time and time again with my sales rep, it becomes a dreaded task. And it, again, I never actually found a way, and it makes sense now that I'm looking at it through a different lens. I could never find a way to make the CRM that I was working with my corporation one that the sales teams I was managing found value in. And that speaks a lot, right? Because I could, no matter what dashboard or report or enablement I put in place, the reality was it was a one-way street, and it was never toward them. It was never to benefit or help them drive their business. And I think what you said, it is a problem. It's a time of sort of reflection probably for some of those types of companies because there are other options. And I think people crave them and want them because it's not that flexible to work, like you said, with a clunky system when you don't have to.
Yeah. And it's not cost effective for the company either. Last question for you, Willow. What's the single most actionable takeaway you'd want our listeners to walk away with today?
I think that if you walk away with this idea that any roadblock or problem in your commercial systems is solvable, I think that it's solvable often the fastest and easiest with your team, whether that's your peers and or people that work above or below you, tends to always be the best way, but really not accepting the idea that this is just the way things are, and really encouraging whoever works around you or with you that it doesn't have to be like that, and that it can be overcome and things can be better. And I think the advent of the access to the information, if you flip it from being overwhelming and almost paralyzing to the idea that this allows possibility.
Yeah.
That it allows for creativity. And again, to your point of 6 to 7 hours that you mentioned earlier of extra selling time, I would also encourage everybody, whether we're founders like you and I, executives or salespeople, as you embrace this idea of low admin in your job, that take a couple of those hours you free up to allow yourself to think, strategize, and come up with new ideas. Because I'd also believe that we can paralyze ourselves with all this information, and we don't necessarily want to crowd it with additional noise, right? We still want to give ourselves this gift of what can I dream up now that I have the ability to eliminate some of this admin, now that I have this ability to possibly solve a problem or a roadblock, that I can replace that with something that's actually better for me, better for my company, better for the customer.
Yeah, absolutely. About a year ago, our operations coordinator had received another opportunity and moved on, and we're very happy for her. But it left us in a difficult position because we thought, okay, we can now go out and try to find somebody, or we can build a solution that will help us out, help us manage the things that she was managing. And at the time, we just didn't have the capacity to go out and find somebody and onboard them. So we built a solution. And it was so fantastic because we never would have thought to even explore that option had we not been put in this difficult, uncomfortable situation. And the solution that we built is so unique that when we would mention it to other people, other business owners, they'd say to us, tell me more, and how can I get this in my business? So now it's turning into a product that other business owners can benefit from. And it just going back to what you said about that creativity and giving yourself a bit of breathing space, because you never know what can come out of that. And it might be the best business opportunity to come your way.
Yeah, no, I love that you said that, because something switched in me a decade or so ago when you're in business and you're in sales and you're in whatever you're doing in your day to day, you can look at through the lens of, right, a setback like that is terrible and I must again rebuild it exactly how I had it. Or, and it sounds like you did this and I now do this when I'm confronted with challenges, is like, what can we do differently? And now that I've embraced that mindset, almost every time that's come upon me is that it's been better, not worse. When there's a challenge, it actually is a real, true opportunity to do things differently.
Yes, and that's just it. And this is what I tell myself now whenever something that I think is difficult or uncomfortable or makes me stressed or unhappy, I try to remember to ask myself, where is the opportunity in this? And what's the opportunity in this? What can possibly come out of this? And so far, it's always been something better. In the moment, I'm unhappy about it, and then definitely complaining about it. But looking back, something better has always come out of it.
I love hearing that from you, because sometimes when you have that belief mindset, you think, am I just looking at it through these, like a different lens that no one else sees? But I love it, because you're proving that it is there. It doesn't mean you don't feel it. It doesn't mean you're like not disappointed, but it allows that pivot instead of walking in a straight line.
Yeah, exactly. Willow, is there anything that I should have asked you that I have not asked you yet?
I don't think so. We've really touched on all the things that get me excited, which is the thing we just talked about, which I forgot, which is looking at challenges as opportunities, the idea of continuous improvement. And when you fix something, don't think that fixes the end, right? I'm sure you've seen that in systems. You build it, but you want to make it better and you want to solicit input from others around you. That's another big belief of mine. And then the simplification, right? Just any opportunity that I can get, especially in this world of noise and actions and to-do lists, how can I make it easier? How can I make it simpler? So those are my big things that I'm taking in 2026 with me. Yeah, that's brilliant.
Thank you so much, Willow, for joining us and sharing your wisdom and your journey and telling us about your new business. And please tell us, how can someone reach out to you if they would like to learn a little bit more about what you do and how you can help them?
Yeah, sure. We have a website, but you can also certainly find me on LinkedIn. I'm Willow Adkins, founder and CEO of Blair and Company, which is BLAYRE and company.com. Find more about our frameworks, how you can work with us.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for joining us, Willow.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
I hope you enjoyed the show. Why not become a podcast host yourself? LIBI is a community podcast, and we would love to have your voice as a host or a guest. Check out libi.ca for more information, show notes, and links to listen to every single episode we've done over the past 7 years.
This episode is brought to you by New Idea Machine. We develop custom apps, automations, and integrations for entrepreneurs and established business owners. Visit newideamachine.com for more info.
Music for the show was created by Tony Del Deegan.